Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, today we're flying into some blue skies and a future of air travel that will make us a cleaner planet. We're talking about sustainable aviation with a man who's at the forefront of making it happen, Michael Winter. He's a senior fellow for advanced technology at Pratt & Whitney. He's had a long career leading the company's tech portfolio, and he's here to join us in the WNHA studio to tell us what's on the front and back burners. Mike, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And just so you know, Michael is a personal friend of mine, so if you're wondering why there are no kind of gotcha nasty questions, that's going to be why that is. But it's also because I'm really ignorant about this stuff, but I'm so interested in it, about how we can make planes fly in a way that don't harm our environment. And Michael, before we went on the air, you told me that there are really three ways, as I understand it, that you're looking at this. You're looking at in the short term, making existing technology, how the planes fly more efficient. In the medium term, looking for alternative aviation fuels that'll make them run cleaner. And then long term, having new substitutes for how these planes fly with materials like hydrogen. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. When you look at the amount of CO2 that's introduced by flight, it's only about 2.5% of all the CO2 generated by humankind. When you consider in 2019, we burned about 100 billion gallons of fuel in the commercial fleet. That's actually a really small number, but it turns out that post-COVID, commercial aviation is going to grow about 4.5% year over year over year. And other sources of emission, things like cars, they're becoming hybrid electric, and power sources like the grid, wind and solar. And so left untreated by 2050, it'll be of order 20%. So what are we doing about it? Well,
in other words, you're saying that while we reduce, if we do, other forms of carbon dioxide producing energy, this amount, the percentage of polluting energy we generate will come more from commercial air flight.
Exactly.
Unless people like you come up with how we're going to change that.
That's right. And so since the dawn of the jet age 60 years ago, airplanes and engines have gotten better by about 1.5% per year. A Boeing 707 compared to today's modern, say, A321, same mission, same payload, and it's about 70% less CO2 per passenger mile. So huge improvements, and we can continue to improve the engines to make them ever more efficient, and we're actively working on it. In fact, we just introduced a new engine in 2016, and we've sold over, we've actually equipped over 1,000 airplanes. It's 16% more efficient. That's 3,600 tons of CO2 less per airplane per year. Well, that's the equivalent of 900,000 trees pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. So what can we do beyond that? Well, the next thing to do is to use sustainable aviation fuels or biofuels. These are approved for use up to 50% today. And the problem is there's just not enough produced yet. But these fuels are made out of things like garbage or sewage or plants that don't compete with food sources. And so we're going to see an opportunity to use more and more of that. In fact, the current administration, working in concert with industry and public-private partnerships, is investing in taking that to 3 billion gallons by 2030.
So, Michael Winter, so Pratt & Whitney builds jet engines. Your job, and you've been there for more than 30 years, correct?
Yes.
As being in charge of technology, what is your role in that? Is that looking at how to improve the engines? Are you in charge of the teams who are researching how to make the next generation of products?
I look around and look for the next generation of technologies. What's coming next? What's going to have impact? And then as we bring those technologies in to mature them, to bring them to the point where there's essentially no risk, because one of the things we absolutely need to do is never compromise on safety. So the technologies have to be fully learned out before you commit it to an airplane.
One thing you told me among the many that I don't know or didn't know, you said we already have the technology to use trash and sewage to power airplanes.
That's correct.
What has to you say it's been approved for 50%. Does that mean 50% of an engine's fuel?
Yes, up to 50% blend can be made from these fuels. There are 7 approved pathways today, and there are about 30 others in the.
And are we operating on any of that, or the engines?
Some airlines, some airlines are starting to use it.
Some airlines are starting to run on sewage and trash.
Yes, in fact, our most recent engine that we ran it on 100% sustainable aviation fuel as part of the certification process just in the last month or so.
So now, what happens in the environment when it burns trash or sewage? Does that not cause pollution?
So when you close the loop on it, when you think about it, when a plant grows, right, to make the food, for example, that pulls CO2 out of the air, and then you're just putting it back in the air when you burn it, and then the next plants will come along, and so it closes the cycle.
So in New Haven, in Connecticut, we have a problem. We're not going to soon have a lot of place to put our trash, correct?
That's correct. And this could be a wonderful opportunity. If you look, say, at the Mira facility, where roughly half of the trash in the state of Connecticut goes currently, you could bring a significant amount of the fuel required for Bradley Airport from that source.
And so, again, when people talk about trash burning plants for energy, trash to energy plants, it often splits environmentalists, because some talk like you're talking about closing the loop, and others still concerned about the emissions. Is that an uninformed debate, or is that a trade-off when you're balancing the pros and cons?
So when you think about trash to energy, you're looking at electricity. And we have other opportunities for electricity like wind and solar. For aircraft, there really aren't solutions. For example, batteries are just too heavy for the aircraft to get off the ground with them on board. So there are opportunities with hybrid electric, and we can talk about those, of what we're doing there. But today, you just can't run all electric.
Okay, so in the short term, you're looking at these alternative fuels.
We're looking at the alternative fuels, and the beauty is the airplanes that we're building today and the engines we're building today, they're going to be flying in 2050. The airplanes stay in the fleet for almost that long. And so those airplanes are designed to burn fuels that as we produce them, better to use less polluting fuels than the traditional fuels.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking to Michael Winter, who has had a long career at Pratt & Whitney, which builds jet engines here in Connecticut. He lives in New Haven, and he's a senior fellow in charge of advanced technology at Pratt & Whitney, trying to figure out the less polluting ways to fly, the sustainable aircraft for now, in a few years, through 2050 and beyond. So you talked about the medium term, you talked about batteries. You said that right now, so much of what we're looking for is solutions with cars and other kinds of environmental initiatives is battery-generated fuel, but that you said it's a little too early, it sounds like, for airlines because they're too heavy. You can't have the planes lift off with the kind of weight of the batteries that would be needed to fly it on battery. But you said the potential in the medium term, it sounds like, is hybrid, just like a Prius. So we're going to have Prius planes.
It's similar to the Prius. So battery storage of electricity or energy compared to jet fuel is about 40 times worse.
Meaning heavier.
Heavier. So that's where the challenge lies. But there are opportunities for hybrid, and there are opportunities across the full domain of flight. You've heard about these urban air mobilities, these flying taxis. There are over 200 companies of record that are working on those. That technology exists today.
Are you working on those engines too for the flying taxis?
So there's a common set of technologies that's a building block for all of those, for flying taxis, for regional turboprops, and even for single aisle and wide body airplanes. And it turns out that the flying taxis, they need like a megawatt of power. A regional turboprop, say a Dash 8, flying on the runway, 2,000 shaft horsepower, or about 2 megawatts. So I could do a 50-50 hybrid, and we're partnered with the Canadian government, the government of Quebec, and de Havilland to do a flight demo of an airplane, a passenger airplane, with one engine being a 50-50 hybrid, and do that by the middle of this decade.
Well, that sounds interesting. So when you told me, did you say 40 times the weight, battery versus fuel?
That's right.
So if it's half and half, you still got 20 times the weight, right?
No, because what you're doing is you're optimizing the part of the mission that you need. It turns out you need most of your energy for takeoff, to get off the ground, that takeoff roll, and to get up to sort of the top of the altitude climb. And so you can augment that with the batteries, but then you burn just regular jet fuel for the duration.
So is part of the weight of the battery come into play if it's in operation or not? Is that why it's heavier? Because it seemed to me if the battery, I'm just really ignorant because I don't do your job. If the battery's on the plane, I thought that's where the weight is.
So it turns out when you're cruising along, they pull the throttle way back. you don't need nearly as much thrust just to cruise. It's that
Just like with the
takeoff.
Prius when you're down.
Just like when you're accelerating your car. That's exactly
And
right.
so if you don't need the throttle, it makes it weigh less? That's what I'm being
So you
ignorant about.
just need less power for that condition of flight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's-
Now there's also an opportunity using the same exact motors, starters, generators, same pieces of technology, put them into a single aisle airplane, a 737 or A320 roaring down the runway, 30,000 pounds of thrust, 18 megawatts. So that 1 megawatt, that's 5%. And it turns out that when we design jet engines today, there are all kinds of transients moving the throttle up and back and all those motions. And that you can sort of manage through those transients with the electricity, the taxi on the ground. Some of that could be done electrically. With that, you can save 5%. The regional turboprop, that saves 30% of the emission energy. That's the cost for the airline, but it's also the CO2 generated. For a single aisle airplane, it's about 5%. That's with today's technology, and batteries do get better. They get better by about 8% per year, year over year.
And then you must be watching with the Ukraine war and the economic impacts of that there's all this discussion about which countries are going to need which other countries to manufacture, mine the components for these batteries, and whether we're going to be beholden to them and whether that's going to create new problems. Any thoughts? Has your thinking at all changed during all this discussion about how much we can rely on batteries or what kind of batteries, or whether we need to change the supply chain and be able to generate those components here in America or some stronger allies?
Yeah, it's very important that we have adequate supply chains that are essentially decoupled from geographic locations.
And we don't, right? Because don't we depend on China so much, and even nickel from Russia, if I'm not mistaken?
Titanium.
Titanium from Russia.
So we've stopped using titanium from Russia back in the middle of the last decade. So less of an issue for Pratt and Whitney. But that having been said, as a nation, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate level of independence, especially for some of the rare earth materials that go into these electronic components and for the batteries.
Wasn't there a rock band, Rare Earth, in the 60s, early 70s?
There probably was.
Okay, Michael Winter, Senior Fellow Advanced Technology, Pratt and Whitney, talking about the future air flight. So we talked about short term, talked about medium term. Long term, tell me about how you really see the landscape changing, how you see hydrogen emerging and other kinds of fuels, and what that will mean for the environment and for efficiency of technology.
Ultimately, we think there's a future for hydrogen. Why hydrogen? Because it stores 3 times the amount of energy of jet fuel. Remember, before we said batteries are 40 times worse. It's 3 times better, but there are some concerns, most notably that it takes up about 4 times the amount of space. So we love hydrogen. In fact, Pratt & Whitney burned hydrogen in engines back in 1958. It was a program called Project Suntan. You could look it up. It was a successor to the U-2 that we were developing with Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And we understand the technology. So there are a number of challenges with hydrogen.
So did they stop? Like, what happened with Project Suntan?
The great question. Because it took up 4 times the volume, the airplane got so big that Kelly Johnson, who led Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, decided it couldn't get off the ground. So, but today we see opportunities with hydrogen. It is, in order to store it, you have to store it as a liquid. You make it really, really cold, minus 253 degrees centigrade. But and also when you burn it, you actually make 2.6 times more water vapor. If you go balance the chemical reaction like you did in high school, that's how much extra water you produce. And water produced in the atmosphere makes contrails. That's the vapor trail you see behind everything. That actually traps heat and can be almost as bad as CO2. So you have to manage all this. But it turns out the one thing that engines need to get better is a source of something cold. So if we could take advantage of the hydrogen, trap the water, stick it back into the engine, now it makes the engine much better. It turns out we have a path that we're actually working on with the Department of Energy and a group called ARPA-E that's going to, the engine is 35% potentially better in fuel burn, 35% less energy required than today's best jet engines.
So you're trying again with hydrogen.
We're trying to make
That's
hydrogen
part of the
work.
many things you're looking at.
And we're really excited about the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill that was passed, and Connecticut's bid, along with New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, to build a Northeast hydrogen hub. And we're actively participating with University of Connecticut and other public entities to bring that to fruition.
Right, they got $8 billion for that to create clean hydrogen hubs. What will be Pratt & Whitney's role in that? They're looking for 4 hubs in the multi-state district.
So we're particularly interested so in order to take advantage of this cold from the hydrogen, you need to do some fairly unique things in terms of how you burn the fuel in the engine. We have a facility in Middletown, Connecticut, and we're looking to partner with the University of Connecticut and the state of Connecticut and this hydrogen hub to essentially have the capability to burn hydrogen or the sustainable aviation fuels, and to do that in the conditions required for this future generation engine.
Michael, you sound so excited about all this work. You've been there, I guess I keep saying this, over, was it 30 years at Pratt & Whitney?
I've been at Legacy United Technologies, now Raytheon Technologies Corporation. I've moved around the company a little bit, but always focused on advanced technology. I love looking at what comes next. I love understanding all the different technologies and seeing how they come together to make these systems that our modern society is based on, most notably for flight.
And have you been this excited before? Is this the most exciting time to do this, or is every era interesting because we've made new discoveries that can make these engines work better, cleaner, more efficiently?
I'm always excited and enthusiastic, especially when I look to the future and the possibilities for sustainable aviation.
And how confident are you? We went through the short-term, medium-term, long-term of how we're going to make these engines run better and how they're going to pollute less. How confident are you that we're going to see new generations of jet engines and engines for other kinds of aircraft that are going to be more sustainable and part of the solution?
Both as a company and an aerospace industry, we've actually mapped the path forward in detail with all the different scenarios for all of these solutions: more efficient engines, sustainable aviation fuels, electrification, and hydrogen, to map a path towards an industry goal of net zero by 2050.
Do you think that's doable?
I do.
What does government have to do to make that work? You mentioned the $8 billion coming in Northeast states for the compact to create hydrogen hubs. What else do you need Connecticut and the U.S. governments to do to make that 2050 goal?
Success is going to be dependent on public-private partnerships. In Europe, they are outspending us more than 2.5 to 1 in terms of the investments in technology. That's at the European level. And then there are further investments at each of the member country levels. And they're significantly outspending the United States in these technologies. Look, we are, as in the United States, is really the only country that can produce these modern jet engines. Maybe there's one other country out there.
Because of our history and that we got in early?
Because a jet engine is the most sophisticated, mass-produced device known to humankind. There's over 40,000 parts in there. They're spinning at tens of thousands of RPM. The temperatures inside, when you compress the air, you squeeze the air like in your bicycle pump, it gets hot. It's so hot that it melts. It's hot enough to melt rocks. And then what do? We dump in fuel and we light it on fire. The melting point, the temperature inside the engine is hotter than the melting point, the metals around it. Maybe don't think about that next time you fly. But it's... and
you sound almost like a physician or a medical researcher who sees the beauty in a cell or in some kind of an organ they deal with as their specialty. And I've talked to them about this, like, well, I have my colonoscopy, but the beauty of how complicated and infinite kind of combinations of components and how they work. It sounds like you have a love affair with the jet engine, no?
I wouldn't say love affair, but it is an exquisite design, and it's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful.
And you feel like it can get better. Michael, what got you into the field? You grew up in New Haven. What got you into this field?
I was always a geek. I loved science even as a kid, and followed my passion all the way through engineering school. Came back, did PhD along with a couple of master's degrees right here at Yale, and went directly to, at the time, United Technologies Research Center. Always was drawn towards flight, and actually did a co-op working where I got to do some design work on aircraft, and just after my freshman year at college, and that really sort of sunk the aerospace bug into me.
Can you give me an aha moment when you kind of climbed the career ladder and delved deeper into this field where you said, this is why I do this kind of work, this is why it makes a difference, or this is the kind of potential I have to steer this in a positive direction?
See, Paul, that's what I love about my job. I strive to have an aha moment every single day.
Tell me one. Anyone ever. Doesn't have to be the aha moment.
So There's just so many. So really the focus on maybe one of the most important ones is that over the course of my career, I focused on the system as opposed to the individual components. All the different pieces come together in a jet engine or in a fuel cell power plant or any of these technologies, in an airplane. They all come together and work harmonically as a system. It's like a band. It's not the music of any individual instrument, but it's how it plays together and how it sounds. And so systems engineering became a significant passion and really focused me on looking at the big picture and understanding not how the individual technologies play, but how do they work together and form a symphony or a harmony.
How about when you fly? What's it like for you to fly?
I love
flying. As a passenger.
So I love flying all the time. I missed it during the pandemic, but maybe I'll just share a quick moment. At one point, I was doing flight test with NASA, and I've done over 700 parabolas on what NASA calls the vomit comet. These are planes that go 3 to 5 miles straight up and then fly nose to the ground for 3 to 5 miles. And you get no gravity for about half of a minute. And you get to float around and, of course, do science in the back of the airplane. And that was just wonderful. Having done that so much, really fed my passion.
So what's going to be the next aha moment?
I can't wait to find out.
All right. Well, Michael, you have such passion for the subject and such a lifetime of knowledge about it. I can't believe how much you spit out so quickly per minute. It's almost like a jet engine that had been perfectly tuned with decades of research and development. And it was just such a pleasure to get a little tune up, a little update on what's happening. So you're optimistic.
I am. I think that the net zero goal of the industry by 2050 is achievable.
All right. And you're going to help make it happen.
I'm going to bring it to fruition. Absolutely.
And then in 2050, we'll fly from Tweed to Jerusalem to celebrate the complete net zero flight. Maybe on a hypersonic vehicle, and it'll only take 1 hour. Okay, I might close my eyes, though, because I get a little nervous of the liftoff, especially at that speed. Michael Winter, Senior Fellow in Advanced Technology, leading the company's technology portfolio at Pratt & Whitney. Thank you so much for coming on Dateline New Haven. It's a pleasure to check in with you and see you in your professional role, knowing what a wonderful person you are in your personal life. You also have a fantastic professional life as well. Thank you, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity. And we're going to take a little break now. When we come back, we're going to meet with the second generation of the DeNardis family seeking a seat in the U.S. Congress. That's going to be a great story to tell as well. In the meantime, we're going to take a break and listen to the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew, How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.